and welcome to the Weekly Artifact. I'm Justin, and this is my co-host.
Hi, I'm Alex.
We're two former creative writing majors searching for meaning in a sea of content. Every other week, we'll select one piece of content each, an article, a video, another podcast, that we found particularly interesting and discuss it. As always, our comments are our own and are not associated with any institution.
The show may contain explicit language or themes. See the show notes for specific content warnings. Justin, what's your artifact this week, buddy?
Alright, so my artifact this week is a video by Harrison Engstrom called What is Really Killing Comedy? A Measured Response. Basically, it opens up with this kind of like comedic eulogy, but the actual points that it gets into is basically Engstrom, who's himself is a stand-up comedian, or at least he says he's like a failed stand-up comedian, so maybe like on the side or whatever, but he basically says that he sort of encounters three basic arguments about why comedy is supposedly dead or, in decline right now. And he says people tend to say, one, that comedy isn't what it used to be, sort of from a quality standpoint. Two, that you can't say anything anymore without being censored. And that the three certain people are considered mainstream comedians now that used to not be considered mainstream, and that those people aren't funny. And he disagrees with these points, and he sort of lays out why each of them are incorrect in his view throughout the video. So on the first point of that comedy isn't what it used to be, he sort of explains how it is true that comedy changes, but that it changes all the time. Sort of the two examples that he uses are sort of like, he shows like a clip of like, this minstrel show and someone in blackface, and sort of how that used to be considered comedy, but now we've changed and it's no longer considered comedy. And then also this extended compilation clip of all these people making racist jokes against East Asian people, with basically the point being that these sort of jokes are lazy and unoriginal, but sort of tend to get repeated until people sort of demand a change or sort of point out why these jokes are racist or offensive or whatever. He points to sort of the corporatization of comedy in the late 80s and early 90s that was associated with like the release of VHS tapes, and how there was like this comedy bubble, and but with all these new comedians, a lot of the quality control goes down, which is why you get a lot of these comedians that just like repeat the same offensive, unfunny material. And that sort of leads into his second point about that sort of about like free speech and that you can't say anything anymore. And so continuing with the idea of the bubble bursting, what we're still left with even after that is this legacy of no quality control. And so you still have these sort of unfunny, offensive comedians who are trying to defend what they consider their free speech, when in reality no one's really stopping them from saying what they're saying. It just isn't funny anymore, and the market no longer really supports them being able to just continue saying the same repetitive, unfunny things. So it's not really censorship for the content per se, but more so for the low quality of the material. It's not even censorship in that sense, just their audience choosing to sort of leave them. And he also points out that there are people who make more, supposedly politically correct jokes are also sort of repetitive and unoriginal. But the difference is that it's at least coming from a different perspective that sort of like brings in its own audience, which is why those people can still sort of get support, even if their stuff might also not be funny for similar reasons of being repetitive. And so then he sort of transitions from this to sort of talk about how there's like this splintering of culture and media in general that sort of hits comedy as well. And so this leads into his third point about how we have these new comedians considered mainstream and why some people might not find them funny. And so he points to Hannah Gadsby and her special Nanette, and sort of how there's a sort of immediate backlash to it as her being this new mainstream comedian that people didn't really understand. But in reality, she'd been doing comedy for at least a decade prior to that and had developed her own audience that found her genuinely funny. But once she's sort of thrown to this international stage with a new audience is when some of the sort of backlash begins because people can't really understand the comedy. And then he basically concludes saying that, if your comedy is not subversive, you're what he calls a status quo warrior, which is a term I really like that he used. And that there's no reason to really be mad about comedy changing unless you yourself just have unfunny material. And that basically a lot of the people complaining about censorship is them just failing to realize that their material isn't funny, and that's why they're losing listeners. So that's basically the video, and we have in the past talked about comedy a little bit just through the lens of Louis, mostly, but I think this opens up the conversation to be a little bit more broad. So I think for me, there's like a lot of important points made in this video. I think one of the more important ones is just like this point that offensive doesn't equal funny. I think that's sort of one of like the core ideas that's at like a lot of the attacks on comedy. But I don't know what your takeaway was, if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that is lost on a lot of people about like, well, why can't I like not be able to like tell that type of joke anymore, especially with the like you said, the East Asian sort of like quick cut comp of like all of the people like doing the joke, and it's like also like racist and like offensive, but that's not inherently but it's not also not funny because it's like obvious, because it's so done. It's so done like it's you joking about a stereotype just means that everybody already gets it. Like that's like what that word means. So like it's not unfunny just because it's offensive, or even it's not even unfunny because it is offensive, because offensive things can be funny in the sense like it offends your senses, or it's something that like you don't like necessarily. But like stereotypes aren't funny because it's obvious. Like that's the point. That's like why like that's when jokes don't work. That's when jokes are like stale, because everybody already gets like it's obvious. Like there's nothing professional about telling the same jokes that 8th graders tell each other when they're first like trying out a joke, because they go for like the obvious material. Like I don't know, like it's just I just like that point that like that I haven't really sort of been able to articulate before, like seeing that like comp up that's not unfunny just because like I'm mad about it. I don't know. The one thing I'll say about a lot of comedies now, especially of famous people and maybe like I guess with like more like woke or like PC comedians, is there is a trend. There's something to be said about like when there's more applause than laughter in some stand-ups that are happening now, where it's just like a TED talk. I don't know. I don't want to necessarily say that that's what Nanette is, but I've heard that about some people say that about Nanette, and I've seen stand-up that are just like a lot of like, I don't know, they're not bits or jokes because there isn't like a punchline. It's just like the audience like applause because they said something that's like, I don't know, championing or like, like the quote unquote like woke or nice or something like that, or like, I don't know, but it's like just like it's not a joke. So like, why is it in your stand-up special? I don't know. Like the standard stand-up special is like an hour, but like 30 minutes or 15 minutes of like tight packed jokes is better than an hour of like a famous person telling like bad anecdotes or something and like 2 good jokes anyways. It's the same amount of like material. That's mostly what I have to say about the state of stand-up comedy at this point from my own personal point of view. Like not enough people are telling actual jokes, good or offensive or unoffensive. Like there's a lot of like lack of joke at this point.
Yeah, it does seem like and I mean, I don't know, there still are definitely more traditional stand-up type stuff
for sure.
But yeah, I do notice that like comedy, there's like a certain branch of comedy that's like not comedy in like you said, like both like potentially a good and a bad way. But I think you see it a lot with like people who say something offensive and then like immediately rush to like the defense of saying it's just a joke or whatever, which is like seems related to this, but like also like kind of bizarre, as if like a joke somehow makes something beyond criticism somehow. But yeah, it's almost like there's almost this view of comedy that's like, the point of comedy is almost to like make some sort of like political point in some way, which I'm not really sure where that idea comes from. I mean, I think even in the video, I don't know if he says it or if it's just one of he has like kind of these like footnotes, I guess, throughout the video, but I think it's one of those where he kind of says like the point of comedy is not to offend, it's to entertain.
Right.
But I think you could, replace offend with whatever. Like it's also not to educate. It's, at least that's my opinion. It should be
Yeah.
entertaining. But yeah, there's like this certain view of comedy that almost does not take its primary point as to entertain, but as to do other things, which is
Right.
interesting.
That's the thing. And like you can do both, but like the focus should be, is this like funny first, or is this entertaining? Like I don't know. I watched Amy. The one I've thought of a couple, but the one I can think of very specifically is Amy Schumer's most recent stand-up. I want to say the most recent one I've watched. I think it's called. I think she calls it also the Leather Special, in reference to Eddie Murphy's leather special, even though had a different name, but when he was wearing like the full leather
Mm-hmm.
outfit. But she spends a good 5 to 10 minutes talking about like going down to Washington D.C. to protest Brett Kavanaugh's not nomination, well nomination, but like the hearing and his getting appointed, his swearing in, and then getting arrested. Like that was the whole plan, and like to like a lot like a theater's worth of applause, but like there wasn't a joke for like 5 minutes straight, and I was like, what? Like, why am I like? Why are you telling me this? Like, I don't care. Like, I can go on your Twitter feed or read like a blog or something. Like, this isn't comedy. This is not stand up. You're standing up, but it's not. It's not a joke. And as far as like the sort of, I don't know, like what you're saying, like to inform, or like I don't know, be some sort of like harbinger of truth or something. Like there's something to be said about like everybody wants to like think they're George Carlin or Lenny Bruce, because that's where these people like sort of earned that right, but like or earned that like name or something for like getting arrested for saying these things. But like we're sort of past that at this point, like it's not, you're not playing on the same field, and it's not like as impressive to do these things because there's not like actual consequences. And like you're also like they all also those bits weren't necessarily like the funny ones either. Like the really makes you think pieces, like it's also like not like that funny. Like I mean George Carlin, I am sort of ambivalent about George Carlin, all things considered, as like a stand-up comedian, but like when he's doing bits about like here's the 7 words you can't say on television, he just says like cunt titty motherfucker. It's like not funny, it's just swear words.
Yeah.
Like there's more bits to it, but like that's sort of the punchline, I think. Like I haven't seen that bit in a while, but like it wasn't like, it's not funny. Like it's true, it's right. He's like, what he's saying is factually correct, but like I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's someone who like edited that clip to like take out all the preamble to it. It's just George Carlin swearing, and the audience just like roaring with laughter.
Yeah. And like, I mean, George Carlin was an insightful guy, and they sort of show that video that was sort of going around Twitter for a while too. I don't know how old I didn't see the date on the video when I watched that you sent me about the death of comedy, but like when George Carlin was just like going in on like Andrew Dice Clay and like his fans, like he's correct, and it's like insightful, and it's like he's in a lot of ways ahead of his time as far as like how we think about it now in the 90s. But like that's the good place to have that conversation is on like Larry King's show. He doesn't talk about that in his stand-up special. So like I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'll just say I feel like for all whatever else we say about comedy, like I do kind of think it's better now than it's ever been for 2 reasons. One, because of that sort of splintering effect they talks about, you can find whatever you think is funny and just kind of go with it. And I think that's something you couldn't necessarily do before. And also, I think just like as sort of like empirical evidence, like if you go back and watch a lot of old comedy movies, they tend not to hold up. Some of them do hold up. There's a few that do
Man,
hold up very well.
nowadays comedy movies don't even hold up. Like
Oh, that's true.
comedy movies are just so bad consistently. There's like one a generation, like a true, like I don't know what you probably, I don't even think you can pick one good comedy movie a year. Like
Well, they don't really make comedy movies anymore because it's too hard to build a mass audience around any particular brand of comedy. I mean, you do like occasionally get like those Judd Apatow. Although I don't even really remember like the last time we've seen like a 21 Jump Street or
Mhm.
Hangover or something that was like blown up. I feel like it's been at least a few years.
Yeah, there hasn't really been I don't know the last time there was like a franchise or sequel comedy. They're usually like really weird, mediocre one-offs with like the SNL cast.
Hmm.
Like like retired SNL cast members that like are sort of around, but you're just like, yeah, it's okay. Like there's like everything's you always say like, oh yeah, that's also a joke, but there's like two things that actually make you laugh in an hour and a half for like a beat, and you're like, all right, well, is that a good comedy movie? You know, like I could also like you could just get a drama or like a horror movie that also is like more funny, like more jokes in it because it's not trying so hard, I guess. But I don't know, like. The ratio's atrocious of joke to like screen time.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know, because it's interesting because like there's a lot of old movies. Like I remember I watched Stir Crazy with my dad, and he like swore that movie was like the funniest movie of all time. And we watched it, and it was like absolute trash. And like he even had to
Yeah.
admit that like it was bad. But he says like when at the time it was like hilarious. So I don't know like, but it seems like now a lot of the comedy movies aren't even like hilarious at the time. So I don't know, but
Yeah, I will say I'm trying to think like I'd have to watch them all again, but I feel like Mel Brooks got something that like most people didn't. I don't know. I feel like a lot of
that's
his
true.
movies are still funny. I think his hold up, but like
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know about most of them. I don't know like the ones we like laugh at now. But like I mean something like I would say like a comedy I would like perpetually stick my neck out for is like The Big Lebowski, which like isn't like an out and out comedy, but it's like well, I think can stay one of like the funniest movies by like the Coen brothers who do like vaguely lighthearted like dramas and like I don't know, like they're better comedians than a lot of people, but like their movies aren't like trying like the posters aren't comedy posters, you know, like it's not advertised as a comedy.
hmm
I'll have to see. My mom is a big fan of Stir Crazy, and I haven't seen it. I just remember like the last time I saw Stir Crazy was the poster or the DVD VHS cover walking through a Blockbuster to really date it, and she's like, "This movie's hilarious," and so I like just remember like Gene Wilder in like the chicken suit, and I'm like, "All right, I wonder what the fuck is going on here."
I would almost recommend it, you should watch it with her just so that you
Okay,
can sort
dunk
of
on her.
not even dunk on her, just kind of like see her face as she realizes, because like it's not even like the jokes don't land in the second half of the movie. There just are no jokes. They like go to a rodeo, and like once they go to the rodeo, there's no more attempts to tell jokes. It's just kind of like some ad-libbed like rodeo stuff. And that's like a whole half of the movie. Like the first half is okay. Some of the jokes hit, some of them don't. There's like a few like real funny scenes, but yeah, like
Yeah.
there's a good like at least hour of the movie where they don't even attempt to tell a joke.
So like the back 2/3 of Full Metal Jacket, how you're just like, oh, this is a good movie, and you're just like, oh wow, this movie sucks, huh? Shout out to Stanley Kubrick, but that movie really drops off.
I've never seen that one.
Ugh, don't worry about it. Watch
uh,
it just to be disappointed by the finale. You're like, oh, how underwhelming. Anyway,
all right, Alex. So, what's your safe? Or, what the
whoa, I'm sorry, what?
fuck?
Wow,
all
you really don't want to talk about my piece. All right, cool, cool, cool.
right, Alex. So, what's your artifact for this week?
So my artifact for this week is an article by on vulture.com called "Who Gave You the Right to Tell That Story?" Subheading 10 authors on the most divisive question in fiction and the times they wrote outside their own identities. And it's talking about authors that write outside of outside of their identity, mostly from a racial standpoint, but sometimes gender too. And the author Leela Shapiro talks about a writer named Ashima Saigal at the beginning who witnessed an incident on a bus which a group of black kids were mistreated by the police, and she was trying to write about like from her perspective, but she realized that like the piece wasn't working, and so she tried writing from the perspective of the black kids, but she was Indian American and she wasn't sure she had the skills or the knowledge to write from the point of view of a black child. So she took a creative writing course called Writing the Other, quote unquote. And it was founded by speculative fiction writers Nisi Shaw, who is black, and Cynthia Ward, who's white. It's been going on for like nearly 20 years. A lot of the things that they're doing, a line that I liked to jump down the article a little bit before they go through the interview is for those following closely the conversation of like who gets to write, what story, it can feel as though the debate has gotten stuck into a rut, unable to move beyond the basic question of whether a writer has the right to tell a given story. One of the goals of the course is to shift the conversation from whether to how, as in whether you can write to how to write it. The class is predicated on the idea that writing the other is a skill that can be taught and learned like any aspect of the craft. To scroll back up quickly for a tight dunking session, there's a line earlier that says, while imagining the lives of people who are different from you is virtually a prerequisite of most successful fiction writing, the consequences of doing it poorly have grown more serious since the pre-Twitter, pre-woke 90s, as the conversation about who gets to tell whose story has shifted from the fringes of publishing to the mainstream. J.K. Rowling, Lionel Shriver, and Catherine Stockett have all caught heat for botching the job. I don't know what it says that she picked 3 white ladies as opposed to also a white guy. I'm obviously people have done that wrong, but quickly we could between the two of us could not figure out exactly what Lionel Shriver did wrong over some very loose googling. So we'll just sort of throw her out. But Catherine Stockett wrote The Help, which I would imagine is a problem. I haven't really heard any criticism about The Help as far as like the POV. I don't know if you have, Justin, like quickly.
I don't quite remember. I think or no, did they make a movie out of that one
They
too?
did make a
Or?
movie out of it. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
don't know. Yeah, I feel like the yeah, I don't know. I don't remember. It was
But
too
more
long ago.
importantly, yeah, most importantly and most fun is the also that J.K. Rowling stays fucking up, and I don't know exactly what they're referencing, what she's referencing specifically, Leela, in this article, but that J.K. Rowling has caught heat for botching the job. I'm going to start off with the fact that her only Asian character is Cho Chang, meaning, and you know that it's the only Asian character because she's the one that said that she's Asian. Her name's Cho Chang, so you'd have to imagine that Bing Song would be around the corner if he also existed in there, or I don't know, Yellow Slanty Eye or something. I don't know what the fuck she wants to call her characters, but
Didn't
the
she
fact
have
that
that like one character that's like a snake, but then she like retroactively made the snake Korean or something?
oh my god, what the fuck? That's amazing. I believe it. I have no idea. I also know that the money hoarding goblins are all short and have big noses and are deeply Jewish looking as far as the broad description she gives them. So she just sticks around, and when one person's like, "I think Hermione's black," she's like, "Yep, you got it. You knew it the whole time. Representation." Because I only said curly hair, and I referenced the other Asian characters, but I didn't give her a color, so she can be black now. But sort of, and then the rest of the article just sort of she speaks to 10 authors about how and why they decide to write outside their identities. My least favorite take is that some found their interior lives uninteresting. Others were compelled to represent the diverse worlds they inhabited. Sort of the ending quote before they sort of interviewed each author is, "It's not as if you can give a prescription to a writer, take 2 teaspoons of empathy and a drop of research," which, talking to a lot of these people, kind of seems like that's the general consensus, but that's fine. We'll talk. You and I can just sort of talk about it piecemeal for which ones we did and didn't like, but I'll just name the authors and the books that they reference before we sort of talk about it more specifically. Jennifer Weiner's book In Her Shoes, N.K. Jemisin with the Broken Earth trilogy, Neil Freudenberger with The Newlyweds, Caitlin Greenidge with We Love You, Charlie Freeman, Victor Laval, The Changeling, Leela Lalami, The Other Americans, Jess Rowe, Your Face and Mine, Monique Trurong, The Sweetest Fruits, Sarah Schulman, The Cosmopolitans, and Ben H. Winters, Golden State. Justin, who were you underwhelmed by? Who were you overwhelmed by? Who were you just whelmed by?
I'm not sure I was overwhelmed by anyone per se. I think it's interesting that I feel like all the interviews have like a nugget in them, whether good or bad. I think probably the one that I thought got kind of closest to the meat of the issue was maybe the Jess Rowe one, even though he was kind of, I don't know, he was like one breath away from just saying that he identifies as a black man, even though he's white. But
He grew up in Baltimore. Relax.
um, but yeah, I thought when he sort of like talks about a student asking him, "How can you be comfortable writing from a non-white perspective?" and he replies, that assumes I'm comfortable writing from a white perspective, and I'm not. Like, I think that kind of, in a roundabout way, gets to sort of the issue of more about like your ability as a writer more so than like your identity. Um, I think it's possible to write any sort of character, um, but I think but also like the fact that the student asked him the question like speaks to like how people tend to sort of like view this issue through the lens of like, well, let me first look at the identity of the author, and then based on that, I'll kind of like judge whether or not they wrote this character well, rather than sort of just like asking, is this character written well or not? To me, kind of seemed to be like part of the issue. If there was one that I thought was the worst, I think I would go with the N.K. Jemisin one. Partially just because I'm like skeptical of Jemisin in general. She's had, I don't know, I don't remember exactly. I don't like follow her or anything. I just know that like every now and then someone will like screenshot a bad take that she has on Twitter or whatever. But also like
Yeah.
even in this interview, there's some like strange lines where she's like, yeah, like I didn't know that disability as a superpower was a trope in 2012 after writing like a whole novel about it. Like what?
Yeah.
I
That was
don't. She kind of paints as like a learning lesson, but it's like, shouldn't you have learned that before you wrote the
absolutely
book? Is like,
fuck
yeah.
wild.
So, but I don't know. Did you have one that you thought was good or bad? Or
I I liked Jennifer Weiner in her shoes was the first one. I just liked the idea of having, like, I hadn't thought of this, but she calls him a sensitivity reader, and just like, she said she'd look at blogs and social media and talk to black friends about writing a black character, but she said that the sensitivity reader she worked with would push her on specifics, like when her character's in bed with him, what's his body like, what's his hair like, because it's going to be different than it is with a white guy. And it's important to talk to people about, do research, as I say, and things like that, but it's also good to have something that's there to, like, I think, just if you're really concerned about this and it's like a big point, to have somebody like sort of focused on like, well, like, you need to do more to like sort of cement this in some capacity if you care enough about it, to not just leave it all ambiguous. Like, I don't know, I just, the idea of a sensitivity reader, I don't know if I like that word, that phrase, that calling it that, but I just like that. I thought that was a decent practice. That's like something I hadn't thought of before, so I just like that idea stuck out to me. I'm trying for bad. What I don't like is that my biggest complaint about the article is that there's no prescription of 2 teaspoons of empathy and a drop of research, when that's literally like what all these people do. Is like that's what all of them mention like doing. Like, I don't know. I feel like broadly, like, it's not like that hard if you're not like a shithead to like not fuck up that bad, like it might not ring true necessarily, but like there was the line that was like Sarah Schulman's The Cosmopolitan, The Inevitable Critique. So one thing I didn't like sort of how she got there, because it seemed I don't know, it's just like a weird thing, but in her one book Shimmer, another black author reader told her it was wrong to have one of the protagonists be concerned that her black grandfather was once married to a white woman. Jacqueline Woodson said a black person wouldn't be hung up on this. Sarah thought to herself, okay, I didn't have the awareness to be accurate, but then like other black people were like, yeah, no, that makes sense. And so like black people, the sort of line that like black people aren't a monolith. Like there's no monolithic black opinion, to quote her directly, but like, I don't know, it's just weird. I don't know, like she said a black person wouldn't be hung up on this, and I just thought to myself before I read the next line, I was like, well, why not? They could be. And then lo and behold, I don't know.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I think that speaks to like again a lot of the issue. Like there's sort of, yeah, we were talking about this a little bit before we recorded, but I think it's related. Like there's like this crowd that like just is interested in scoring like woke points and like not actually making social critique, and a lot of it kind of like comes from that crowd where it's kind of like, a white author writing a black character, like let me just like make any critique that I can just to like sound like I know what I'm talking about. when really like it just doesn't make sense when you like delve below it. Like yeah, like the idea that a black person couldn't be interested in a particular question, like that just yeah, it makes no sense. Like um
Right.
but yeah, like ultimately I think it's just about, and there's one person who sort of mentions it that they wrote like 50 pages of backstory or whatever that didn't end up making it into the actual
Mm-hmm.
story. I think it was it's Caitlin Greenidge. And I think that's kind of like a lot of what it comes down to is just like knowing your own character and giving
Mm-hmm.
them like interiority
Mm-hmm.
and like understand, and like part of it like comes from like research and like knowing like how certain laws or histories of immigration or slavery might like influence their backstory. But like yeah, ultimately like you can make your character interested in whatever they want, like as long as it makes sense with them as a character. Like no one can really come in and be like, oh, this character doesn't make sense because like they're black or they're gay, and like no gay person would do X. Like that's yeah, that's like in a way more problematic than any way that
Yeah.
you could like miswrite a character.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other thing too is just like not making them a stereotype as well is
Mm-hmm.
probably like good, because like ultimately like a lot of this article doesn't sort of question the logic of labels, which fine whatever, but like at the end of the day like no one fits into a box anyway, and so like
Mm-hmm.
to critique a writer for not fitting their character within a certain box doesn't really make sense, because that's just how life is.
Right.
I guess like the only other point I had to make was just like I think one of the other things that goes sort of unsaid in the article is just that like pretty much you get a pass if you the closer your character is to yourself, the more of a pass you get. And also like if
Mm-hmm.
your character is like cisgender, heterosexual, white male, you also pretty much just get a pass, which, is not, I'm not saying if that's right or wrong or whatever, but I think that's, again, that kind of like connects into like the people who are just trying to score the woke points. That's kind of like how they view it. And that's also
Yeah.
like, that's like the beginning and end of their like critique, which is
Mm-hmm.
like not actual social critique.
Mm-hmm. Well, Justin, as to former creative writing majors, have you stepped in? Have you wrote outside of your experience in a sort of, I guess, protagonistic aspect or even antagonist, but like a major character, not just Josh, who's African American, for example?
uh, yeah, I've definitely written outside my perspective. I think I don't know, I've definitely written female characters of white and black, and I've written male characters white and black. I don't know that necessarily that I've done like too much with other sort of identity issues, or at least like I don't really like bring that to the surface as much in terms of like gender or like transgender. I've never done like that sort of character,
Mm-hmm.
but I've definitely like done different sort of like racial things.
Famously for you and I, in a writing workshop together, and the promise that is given of us being former creative writing majors in the intro that we've never talked about. I wrote the beginning chapters of a very promising, if I do say so myself, novel, uh, with the two leads being a black woman and a young Latina teenager. Even though she was too old for young adult fiction, she was still a young adult. But who's to say? Um, and most of the critiques were about the white man I wrote when that happened. So I don't really know what the fuck's going on, buddy. I'm gonna be honest with you. That has more to do with the audience than anything, but still, my point stands. I think.
Yeah, that was an interesting environment to write in. So
Mm-hmm. Without doxing anybody, I suppose, including especially ourselves, but including anybody else. But I've done it. I think I did 100% good job without any sort of critiques or problems. I didn't ask or seek any sort of advice or reflection on it. So yeah, I'm 100%. They should have interviewed me about this shit, to be honest.
all right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't have a segue for the safe room.
All right, Alex. Now that we're in the safe room, what do you have on your mind?
Well, Justin, we sort of, share broadly what we're going to talk about with each other before we record. So I might need you to sort of hold my hand through this again because you made it sound a lot more agreeable and articulated it better than I did when I told you what I wanted to talk about. But I'm going to follow your lead first about retiring a word after you so graciously put problematic into the ground. I'm going to retire. I'm going to retire awkward as sort of any sort of use of like, I don't know. Sorry, not awkward of me. Any use of awkward in any sort of capacity of one-on-one interaction or self-descripting adjectives, which would broadly to I do not like when people, I hate when people sort of tell you when they show don't tell. I'm using 2 ears, buddy. When they tell you and do not show you who they are as a person, and sort of use that as a crutch to sort of excuse any behavior now that they've highlighted it or erroneously, I might add. When somebody's like I'm just like so awkward, like it's just that's just who I am, or like you're like tell a joke that's like very lukewarm, both in quality but also like offensiveness. Like it wasn't that bad and it wasn't that funny. You're like, oh, I'm such an asshole. Yeah, no, what you said makes you an asshole. That line makes you the asshole. Nothing else before that indicated that you were an asshole, but now you are. You're right. And what you had said, correct me if I'm wrong, or please feel free to add, but the sort of relying on this sort of self-awareness to either excuse the behavior, or specifically with awkward, when nothing is awkward, and there may be just a very natural lull in conversation for 2 seconds, or just somebody's thinking of something, say like, "Oh, awkward," or like, "Oh God, isn't this?" I'm really sorry to make everybody uncomfortable, and like nobody was, but now we are. Now we are.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like it's a little bit related to my safe room, so I'll try and draw like a line between those and not segue to that yet. But
I mean, you can. I've said everything I have to say. I'm right. I don't need to tell me that you agree, which you do, and then you can go right into yours. I'm happy to hear
it. No, but yeah, I think I don't know why. I mean, maybe it's sort of like us living in this postmodern age where everything has to be kind of meta, and people feel the need to like sort of narrate their own stories as they tell them in real time or something. I don't know, but yeah, I don't really understand. It's I guess I'd have to think about more if like awkward is the one that happens most often with, but definitely happens a lot with awkward where people will say something is awkward when it's really not awkward, or like call themselves awkward to sort of like you said, like excuse whatever, which is I don't know, because I feel like our whole thing is always like trying to get people to be self-aware, but like not like that, like
Not
self-aware for like the purpose of like making yourself better, or like navigating social situations better, not self-aware just for the sake of being self-aware. But so are you retiring the word awkward, or just its use in that context?
It's used in that context because I do like, with critiques like this is an awkward transition, I think is completely acceptable. And I don't know a better word sort of that everybody can like, understand what's happening. I guess it's a little vague, but if you like elaborate, I mean, I guess it's kind of like problematic. It's a little vague if you just say like this is awkward, but like you can like elaborate on it. I don't know, maybe the whole word, I guess the word without any qualifier should be canceled, which I think is what we settled on problematic, right? Or did you say problematic is out? Like it's just not worth recovering.
Yeah, my thing with problematic is like we could save it, but where it doesn't, it seems like that ship has sailed. So I just wasn't willing to fight that battle.
I'm willing to go to bat for awkward with the sort of caveat that you qualify what you're saying, because it's kind of like that thing of like, you like somebody makes like a real bad joke and you say like, well, why is that funny? And then you just like, then you got them. They're trapped. They gotta eat shit. And you can do that with awkward too. They'll be like, well, it's awkward now, and you're like, why is it awkward? And then they're just like, because, and you're like, no, I mean, it is now. It's awkward because I asked why it's awkward and you didn't have an answer. That's why it's awkward. And you can defend yourself, but they can't defend their whatever bullshit that is. I don't exactly know the sort of root cause of that. Maybe the postmodernism, maybe some defense mechanism, and we're just bullying people with anxiety, but that's good.
So you're saving awkward so that you can use it against people?
I'm saving awkward to weaponize it against those who misuse it.
Yes. Seems on brand.
Thank you. That's all I ever want to hear. I'm afraid of being off brand. You got to tell me if I'm ever sleeping on the job here. But that's all I have to say. I'm on brand. I've stuck the landing. Please, Justin. You've already vaguely alluded to. Well, tell me, Justin. What's the segue? Help me.
So I think part of this sort of relates to what I'm going to talk about in my safe room, which is this sort of like ironic distancing from your own emotions through like an attempt, not quite an attempt to comment on them, but I still think there is like a little bit of that ironic distancing going on. But so my safe room, I just saw the movie The Lighthouse recently, or probably last year by the time this podcast comes out. Maybe literally, maybe
quite literally.
But there's a lot of scenes, and also this is applicable to Midsummer, which I saw over the summer.
Midsommar, sorry.
Thank you.
I didn't want them to search the wrong thing.
And both movies sort of try and have scenes that are intentionally set up to, be off-putting or make you uncomfortable. And in both times I saw the movies in the theater, and people would laugh at these scenes. And again, the scenes aren't really funny, and I don't want to like spoil anything necessarily, but there's no like, it's not like there's like a setup or a punchline to any of the scenes. They're just kind of, it's very strange imagery, and you don't really know what's going on, or you sort of know what's going on, but you don't know why it's happening, or in the case of Lighthouse, you don't really know if it's really happening or not. And rather than people being willing to just sort of like sit with this discomfort, they just start laughing at it, knowing that's not funny. I mean, I can't prove that they don't find it funny, but it just, if you had the experience of watching the movie in the theater, and you're also the type of person that doesn't laugh at the scene, I think you will agree with me. But yeah, it just seems to me that it's like they're laughing because it's the only way that they can think to avoid feeling uncomfortable for even a slight moment. And yeah, it seems like, I mean, I sort of connect this to like the same reason why people like Marvel movies, because Marvel movies also seem to do that thing where anytime they're approaching any sort of genuine emotion, they undercut it with like some sort of attempt at cheap humor. And so you never actually are forced to confront anything. The best example of this is probably the second Guardians of the Galaxy. It's like there's like all these moments between like the sisters, and like every time they're like having a moment, some character literally just like pops up from like off screen and like just makes like a stupid joke, and then the scene ends. It's like completely blatant in that movie. But yeah, I don't know if you've noticed this at all.
I have. Actually, I told you that there was one that I thought of, but I thought of an even bigger one that pisses me off to this day. And this came out, when did this fucking movie came out? Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 came out in the year of our Lord, 2010. So I was, quick math,
15.
13. Yeah. Wait, yes. Fuck, I did that wrong. I had math. 15. Wrong way with the 9. I was 15 when this movie came out. I saw it in theaters. I hadn't read the books. I still won't, and I never will. The movie ends with Dobby dying, saving the 3 main characters by teleporting them out of there, but he gets killed. And it's them, and they bury them, and it's very sort of not Mel. I mean, it's sad. Dobby's the boy. I like Dobby. He died. He died a hero. He saved him, and they like bury him, and it's like this. There's this music over. It's very sad and somber, and here lies a free elf or whatever. It got me, and I was like sad. And then credits, and it was full theater, quiet, and then one guy just goes in a British accent, "Why Dobby die?" And everybody cracked up, the whole theater, and I was pissed when that happened. I was like, "Fuck you!" Just like, how dare you? It was. I mean, disrespectful to a fictional character seems kind of obnoxious in my in this weird fandom thing, but just sit with it. Like, I agree with you. Just you don't have you didn't need, nobody wanted that. Nobody needed that. They all laughed, but it wasn't funny. It still wasn't funny to me now. It still makes I'm heated all over again thinking about that shit. That pissed me off. That was the first one. I just thought of that now. So fuck God, yeah. So I'm still mad about that. The other one was, and this is more of a spoiler warning. It's about Snowpiercer. And if you haven't seen Snowpiercer, stop listening to this podcast right now and go watch it. Don't listen to anything else but until you see Snowpiercer. But the ending...
There's 2 minutes left in this podcast.
Yeah, and this is all that's left. Relax. There will be cuts. Chill out.
You said stop the podcast now. I'm like, there's 2 minutes left. Just finish it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think we were going over long. No, stop the podcast. You don't get to hear the Trump bit. You
don't get to hear the outro.
No, you don't get that. You'll never know what happened. Anyway, at the end, Chris Evans' character, the hero, the protagonist, the unbreakable, admits to eating babies. They're so impoverished they had to eat children. And I watched, he's like, I know babies taste the best, I think was the exact line. And he's broken as a man admitting this. And I watched it with one friend who also really likes films, and we're just kind of close. And I was like, that fucking hit me like a ton of bricks. A week later, I watched it with 3 of my other friends, closer friends, and we all laughed like motherfuckers the whole time about eating a baby. And I felt like I betrayed myself. I cheated myself for the sake of joining in with that. But I knew going in that scene would not have the same effect. I said as much to myself and to the kids when I walked in. I was like, I saw a scene with this other kid. It was really powerful. When I see it with you guys, you're not going to feel the same way. Lo and behold. And it's okay because it was a fairly small movie relative to a lot of things, and it was pretty late in the run, the running of it when it was out. So I think we might have been by ourselves, and even we tried to stifle our laughter, but it wasn't supposed to be funny, and I did try to sit with it the first time, but I've done it myself, and I failed. I failed you, Justin, 6 years ago, whenever the fuck Snowpiercer came out.
I'm trying to think. No, you failed me more than 6 years ago too. So
it was 6 years ago though, so for me. Anyway, so yeah, I have experienced this, and I do think people need to be more. We've talked about this before, right? That people just need to be more uncomfortable.
This sounds familiar. Yeah.
I could not place it, but I agree with you.
I don't even remember if it was on the podcast or off mic.
Somebody, all of the fans, tweet us, at us.
Tweet our non-existent Twitter.
Yeah, and we don't want you to know our names, so.
All right, well, that's our show for this week. See the show notes for a link to view the artifacts for yourself.
Music for the podcast was produced by Nicholas Pizzuto.
Rate us 5 stars on iTunes. Follow us on Facebook. I think that's the first time I've announced that one, but we do have a Facebook. And tell a friend or an enemy about the show. Join us again in 2 weeks, or whatever. As we find 2 new texts to discuss.
Hey, Justin. What the fuck is a hamburger?